This is a microphone test for the Services, Climate and Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which will begin at 5:30.
Okay, welcome everyone. Good evening and welcome councillors, members of the public and anyone watching online. This is a meeting of the Services, Climate and Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. We are not expecting the fire alarm to go off. If it does, please leave everything and follow the exit signs on the Pease Hill side of the building and exit via the Pease Hill door and assemble in St Mary's Passage. Members, when you are not speaking, please ensure you switch off your microphone so the live stream picks up the correct speaker. So moving on to the first item on the agenda, I have received no apologies for this evening's meeting. Are there any now?
Richard Swift is here.
Yeah, and Eve? And Eva?
Yeah.
Okay.
Heard anything.
All right. Okay, thank you. So second item is the declarations of interest. Does any member have a declaration of interest to make? No? Okay, thank you very much. Item 3 is the minutes of our last meeting. Can we agree these as an accurate record?
Chair, so I think that be subject to listing Katie Porritt attending the last meeting.
Has anyone got any comments here? Right, so there's a small adjustment to make in that Councillor Katie Porritt was there as well and needs to be put on the there as attending. Okay, so subject to that, I think I see no objections, and I will sign the minutes at the end of this meeting. Item 4 is public questions, and there are no public questions for this meeting, so we will move straight on to item 5, which is community engagement and democratic involvement. This provides us with recommendations for how the City Council can improve local engagement and decision making. And the papers are in the first supplement. I'll hand over to Sam Scharf, Director of Communities, to introduce the report, and then we'll invite Councillor Anna Smith, Cabinet Member for Communities, to explain how this committee will be involved in these proposals going forward. Sam, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so this, I mean, we're getting used to a new sort of scrutiny process. So I thought I'd lay out both where this sits within our sort of discussions, as well as a bit about the paper, and then hopefully facilitate, Chair to facilitate a conversation and discussion. So this is not scheduled on the forward plan for Cabinet at the moment. This is an opportunity for scrutiny to be part of the discussion and part of how we might form what is in the paper today, which we will go through. To take us back now years, the genesis of this started with a review of area committees, which is over 2 years ago. Those were paused, and they were paused over sort of 2 iterations of papers that came, what was then to Civic Affairs. And in the changes to the Constitution in April were effectively stopped because they aren't referenced in the new Constitution. Alongside that, which is in Appendix 2 of the paper that you have, was a piece of work then done by New Local, not to say what wasn't working, but was actually to help us set out a new set of structures, a new framework for how we not to replace area committees, but to, I guess, do democratic and resident engagement better. It was felt through lots of the reasons for pausing and then stopping area committees that they weren't fulfilling that part of what we wanted them to do. So that's the sort of genesis of where we've got to today. And what I'll cover is both sort of frameworks for proposals, but also just a reflection on the amount of work we already do, both from a member perspective and from an officer perspective, in terms of engagement with our communities already. And that was one of the reflections in the new local report. So that's sort of where we've come from, and just a bit of a frame for the discussion today. And Councillor Smith will add a little bit at the end. So I'll cover a couple of things. One is about actually in transformation, how we've reorganised some of the teams in the organisation to align with some of this work, because I think that's important for the conversation as we go. Just to reflect a little bit on the paper and try and explain it a little bit more, and then I will leave it at that for then a conversation really. As part of transformation, we actually set up with a number of teams, but a cluster of teams called the Enabling Communities Cluster. What sits in that, I'm not going into lots of our structural detail, but what sits in that is our work around community centres, given they are very geographically placed, and the teams know residents very well. Our grants team, who understand the voluntary sector deeply and clearly have huge links into the voluntary and community sector and our communities. An enabling communities team, which Vicky leads, and is structured around neighbourhoods, so is geographically structured and very much structured around involving, listening and working with communities in place. And we'll come on to some of what we've described in the paper here. And we have a team led by Kerin Jali, which is around resettlement and community equity, but in essence all focuses on communities within the city based on need and identity. So we've got a team who specialise and focus on young people, for instance. We've got a resettlement team that support refugees coming into the city. So we have, as part of transformation, which sits very, very neatly with this set of proposals, we have teams that are already structured in a way to reach communities in different forms, whether they be geographically or whether they be based on need and identity in the city. And hopefully, the reason I reference that here is I think that hopefully will help think about how we align the work we're already doing with expectations and views and input from yourselves about how members sit within that and how they represent those communities in conversations as we go. I should say that alongside that, we've also aligned those structures, particularly the neighbourhood team, with health structures in the city. And when it comes to examples like Shaping Abbey, that has the ability for us to work alongside health colleagues and alongside county colleagues in the same geography is incredibly beneficial. We hope health don't completely change their structures, just as we align, but at the moment, and it's in the paper around the direction of travel for health and their 10-year plan, actually what's looking like is they're strengthening their neighbourhood working. And so the alignment that we've got with the geographies in the city with health should actually really benefit, again, what we're proposing in some of this, for residents particularly, clarity and alignment about how things work and who to go to ask questions. So that's another bit of the transformation that we've tried to make sure that we've aligned as best we could. In terms of the paper, it talks about four areas of thinking, which I will just try and elaborate on a little bit because I appreciate that there's elements of jargon which I try and get rid of, but I get called out, which is absolutely fair. So the first one is around what we've talked about, our Cambridge conversations. Now, for the last 2 years, and I believe will happen again this year, the leader of the council has had a Cambridge conversation, normally in the small hall over there, normally with voluntary sector and businesses. And it's sort of an opportunity to bring people together and sort of reflect on the year, think about the year ahead from a city perspective. What we're proposing in a looser form is that that continues into neighbourhoods, led by members as you and the wider council see fit, an opportunity for at least once a year a local conversation to happen that people can come to, which can be two-way. It can talk about what's going on in the city council and what we're doing, big issues that might arise every year. Also an opportunity to listen to residents without necessarily a specific topic that might have agitated a conversation. That's a slightly different way. What the framework that sits around that is that it would be led by members as an opportunity to sort of be that community champion in which members are, with the support that the team, the enabling communities function, or other parts of the organisation could bring to that conversation. So it wouldn't be, or up for discussion today, a hugely formulaic structure that happens every single year. Be interested in your feedback, but it could be an outline framework that members could call upon the team to come to a conversation that happens within their community. And that's a sort of base, like if I try and describe it, the view would be that that's a sort of baseline opportunity for every part of the city to be involved in some conversation with members outside maybe your normal casework or campaigning that might happen, and feed in thoughts, views, issues into the organisation. The second tier, again, if I put it like that, it's not really designed in this way, is around what we've talked about around shaping neighbourhoods, and you'll possibly be more familiar with at least the framing of that, given we have been running Shaping Abbey, and we did do a members briefing back in February or March on this, which arose from a particular part of the city that is going through quite a lot of change, both in regeneration terms, but also quite a lot of growth around the sides of it, and quite a lot of opportunities through other partnerships. So we put in place a much more resource-intensive structure led by the City Council, but it brought health colleagues and county colleagues alongside to do some much more resource-intensive work in Abbey. We have now rolled that out to Coleridge based on other triggers, and we are just about to launch a similar type of approach, that we've sort of already started that in North Cambridge, based on a lot of the work that we've been doing around North Cambridge Framework for Change. So this is about providing, again, another element of the framework for how we would reach communities should a number of factors come into play, specifically around the regeneration, growth, any particular challenges that might be going on. If we reflect in Abbey, lots of opportunities for investment, whether that be at Abbey Pool, the 3G Mugger, the BMX track, through Section 106 funding. So when you started to map all of that, you realised how much was actually happening in that one area. The third bit I've sort of alluded to talks about how actually we reach what we call like seldom heard voices or seldom heard communities. That is different than being in a place and expecting everyone to care about where they live at the point that we're there on the issue that we're talking about. And actually, if you look at all of our consultations, whether it be the work from the Rich Picture a couple of years ago, whether it even be the consultations we've run in North Cambridge, where we did a lot of face-to-face consultation in North Cambridge, but we didn't necessarily hear from all of the communities we had hoped to hear from. So we have some structures in the organisation. We have a Gypsy Roman Traveller worker officer that supports that sort of liaison and advice. We've got strategic young people's leads. We have access and we work with rough sleeping community. So we already have a number of structures in the organisation to hear from communities that may not feel comfortable in the settings that we have. But again, and we would continue with that, and again, useful to hear from yourselves about how we best do that. Something that would be useful to talk about that's in the paper is around making sure that we provide members and residents with data, the right information about what's happening in their local community at the right time to make good decisions. I'm sure that's something that you'll have some views on. And again, just the last bit that I'd reference in the paper, it does highlight the fact that there are quite a number of ways in which members and residents can already make vital contributions to how we work and how we make decisions, whether that be assets of community value, whether that be through Section 106. I'm not going to go through the whole paper. So that's all. I just wanted to provide that sort of context between how we've sort of shaped the organisation to hopefully facilitate some of this a little bit better. Some of our thinking about how we do it and the fact we're already doing a lot of it. I didn't talk about tenants, and tenants are clearly a very key part of what we do as an organisation and a substantial population in the city. And we already have a team who are doing some excellent work around tenant engagement. We had a housing advisory board even just yesterday with a tenant chair chairing decision making in the council, or chairing advising, sorry, not decision making in the council. Need to be very clear about that. So we already, that's really just what I want to set out. I'm sure Councillor Smith has a couple of points that she wants to add on that, and then happy to open up.
Thank you. Councillor Smith?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for letting me come in and say a few words, and thanks to Sam and all the team for the work they've been doing here. I just wanted to say that I'm here tonight very much in a listening capacity, and that's because this paper is not at this stage a concrete set of proposals that is going to go to the next cabinet meeting. It is a genuine set of stimulus questions and ideas to kick off your discussion this evening. I'm very keen, as the relevant cabinet member, that we do this in collaboration with this committee and across the council, because this has to be right for the whole council and our whole city. So the intention of bringing the papers today is to hear really early from this committee as whether this looks like the right lines, whether there are other suggestions, so that can help shape our proposals. And if there then are proposals that come to a fully formed set of cabinet papers, they will of course come back to this committee in the usual manner, in that more formal pre-scrutiny way. So today, what I'm here for is to listen very carefully to what this committee has to say, to the ideas that this committee has, so that we can really work collaboratively to shape that. So I'm really excited about hearing what people have to say this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. So I'll open it up to questions. Councillor Gardner-Smith.
Great, thank you. I mean, first of all, to say thanks to the officers and Councillor Smith for bringing this, and it's useful to understand exactly at what stage this is at, because certainly I think one of the comments that I would have made is that at the moment it doesn't feel like there are many concrete recommendations in here, but I understand that, you know, that you want to get our input into that. I've got a few comments to make and some questions as well, if that's okay. I mean, the first thing to say is that I do think this is a really important conversation for the council to have. You know, in our daily lives, most of us find that the world and services are much more responsive and much more flexible and personalised, largely due to these mobile devices that we all have in our pockets. And there's, you know, good research to suggest that you know, people's democratic engagement often doesn't reflect their engagement in other parts of their lives, and actually that we can really improve trust in democracy and in government as well by improving the way that we engage with residents. So I think it's really, really good that we're having such an expansive conversation about this. A few comments on, so overall I support the direction of travel when it comes to particularly in terms of having a more flexible approach and a more tailored approach to, and also more focus on reaching hard-to-reach communities that we know are far less engaged in deliberative processes. I would just note that I think the risk with taking that approach is, of course, that you have less clarity. You know, it can result in less clarity for residents as to what the procedures are and the structures are for their formal input into council decision making. And so I think there does need to be a balance struck between you know, at that really sort of hyper-responsive, flexible approach and a more formalised structure where people know that there are regular points of engagement throughout the year that they can plug into if needed. The other thing I think that isn't clear from the papers yet and would be really important to clarify is what the resource expectation for this is. I think one of the things that struck me reading the papers was that it wasn't clear whether we were expecting there to be, whether there was an expectation that more resource would be put into this area over time or less or the same, but resource reallocated in different ways. And actually a more flexible approach could be more resource intensive, I think, depending on the direction of travel. So I think it would be useful to hear initial thoughts on that from Sam and Councillor Smith. Just a couple more points to make. Given that this is not now part of our constitution, our council's constitution, as I think area committees were, if I understand correctly. Also, I think there does need to be real clarity over what is expected and what the threshold is for engagement with, those sort of trigger points. So real clarity over what are the trigger points to engage in to initiate some of these different processes. And then just final point really is, well, a quick question on the lessons from the pilots as well. Yeah, they were mentioned, but I didn't see much in there on what we've learned so far from them. And then final point is just really about ambition, level of ambition. Is this ambitious enough for us? So on the 4 points that you've outlined here, I think a lot of them are to do with listening and engagement, but less to do with participatory decision-making, which I think is a really interesting development in democratic procedures. So, for instance, there are examples about citizens' assemblies. Should we be thinking in Cambridge about a procedure that we engage, we engage citizens' assemblies on really big controversial decisions in this in the city. And similarly with our grants programme, which is a fantastic programme that we have in the city, and I think we're all really proud of, should we be thinking more ambitiously about citizen participation in grant making, so full participation in decision making, so way beyond the EIPs that we have at the moment? Should we have a citizens panel? There's just been an announcement from the Labour government about neighbourhood panels and Pride in Place money, but that is all going to be decided by community panels, not by the local authority. The local authority will sit on it. So level of ambition, I suppose. I'm going to leave it there. Thanks.
Sam?
Probably respond to a couple of those. I told you it would happen. What is probably missing from this paper is moments like tonight, where we've got public questions, the work that members do in their communities all the time in terms of engagement, in casework, in surgeries, full council public questions and things like that. So that probably should be wrapped up in here to reflect the fact that there are lots of other methods for the public that are very consistent, that are quite formal, where they can view ask their questions and opinions, and through different ways shape decision making. I do get your point around the fact that there's going to be a balance as we try and formalise this about that clarity, and it comes to your second point about trigger points, about why shaping Abbey? What was it that sort of triggered that tipping point between just us doing lots of work in Abbey and bringing together residents, stakeholders, lots of public sector officers pretty much every month for about a year. We've tried to outline a little bit of that in Appendix 1, but I'll take that away and try and think whether we can be even more deliberative about that. I think that's absolutely fair. In terms of resource expectations, I think there is no expectation that this structure or approach would require any more resource. My point in the intro about sort of how we've already reshaped and thought about some of the teams is to enable this to work well, not these specific things, but in sort of whatever form this takes, the team are already heavily embedded in communities, listening to communities and reacting to communities. So I wouldn't anticipate, unless what came out of this was quite a significant structural thing about, let's say, the Cambridge Conversations, which required a lot of officer time to try and service. There is no expectation that more resource or less resource is either needed or used. Lessons learned, I might ask Vicky to give you a bit of lessons learned on Shaping Abbey, particularly. Probably not answer the ambitious question, because I think that's probably more for development of this conversation.
Sure, thank you. So a few things that we've done through Lessons Learned. We've been really trying to capture lessons as we go. So when we started the Shaping Abbey work, it really was a case that there was a huge amount going on, lots of funding being spent in Abbey, lots of great programmes coming forward for regeneration, where we know we're taking those decisions based on challenges that people have with kind of the state of their homes and things that have really been troubling the community in Abbey for a long time. What we heard from communities was that didn't understand how it all connected, didn't understand how all of our projects were separate and different and being led as individual work streams. So a lot of the work around Shaping Abbey is about shifting how council officers and departments work together and understand the interconnectivity of those works and those programmes. If you're living in a community, you understand how all those things intersect, and you think, well, why can't the council be more joined up and see this as a whole programme of community change? So we've really tried to do quite a lot of work around kind of internal mechanisms and making sure that council services can respond in that way and understand their projects and interconnectivities that way. Other things we've learned about Shaping Abbey is really needing to make sure that we've got much better communications and flows of communication and data with members, between members and officers, and that has been a little bit of a challenge. And other things about also going to that less formal approach in terms of moving away from things that weren't working. Formal meetings where we ask people to come and sit down like a school assembly is off-putting for a lot of people, needing to make sure we're doing things at times when people are available and taking council services and an ability for the council to listen and engage to where the communities are at. And we had stopped doing that for quite some time, so we're back now at community events, things like the community lunches that take place, that generally tend to be led by community organisations. So a shift in kind of getting back to some things that we may have worked in different ways before, and much more thinking about how can we as council officers and the council be in spaces where people are already at and have those conversations and make sure we've got something to hook, that there's an understanding of what people are going to get out of it and how they see that change happen. So we have got some reports that have been written about change and how we've learned through that process, which we can share with Cabinet. What was the other one?
I just want to give a couple of practical examples of what has happened that wouldn't, it's hard to say, but probably wouldn't have happened had we not taken this approach. So in that time, the GP surgery changed, the whole process of the GPs leaving and new GPs being commissioned changed, which clearly caused quite a lot of a challenge to those in Abbey. This is about us holding a convening role across public services, which is always one of those things that seems to be quite problematic. Through the Shaping Abbey events and approach. We had the new GPs come to those events. People knew what was happening. We had a joint communication plan between health and between the City Council and between key stakeholders like Abbey people. So some of this is about just the lens in which residents see and live their lives in their community. They don't want to have to deal with multiples. So that was one specific example where we were able to join up. Not because we were addressing one issue, though that's how Shaping Abbey was triggered, but actually because we heard from residents about being consistent and staying. The amount of times we heard in those first couple of sessions with what was 70 residents at the time was, you've been here before, you were here 20 years ago, and then you just disappeared and nothing happened. And so what we have done through Shaping Abbey is a commitment where all of this work is going on, that a new community centre is being built, which we've managed to work with Abbey people to take on, which is what we heard from the community. Are key things that have all happened because we've had a presence there, we've focused there. We've shared, the second example is we shared, because of this, we've actually joined resources with health. On the 15th of October, there will be a new youth cabin in right next to Abbey Pool, specifically for young people in Abbey, designed by kids from the Galliford School and other young people in the area. That's come because we've been working alongside health on the needs from Abbey, listening to what people have been asking for unfortunately, probably generations, and we're now able to start saying, well, we've listened, and now we're starting to do things together. So those are very practical things that have happened in 1 year just by the fact that we have reconfigured just how we're thinking and working, in all honesty.
Okay, we haven't responded to the ambition point that Councillor Gardner-Smith made, so I think we should have a bit of a discussion amongst ourselves, so feel free to comment on that. But it's now Councillor Pounds.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Sam. I'm really pleased that we're looking at this issue again and revisiting it. So I just wanted to share a couple of things with you. So I did chair the East Area Committee for 2 years just before it was paused. And my observations really are that we did get people come along to them. They were online because of lockdown. So it wasn't easy times, but it was always the same people, and they always had a particular thing that they were working on, and they came regularly. But we didn't get the general public, or very rarely get ordinary people. What I did find and do find still now is that we have a community, Romsey Music, and we have a concert once a month, and they are regulars, but they are very much embedded in the community. It's for people who don't want to travel into town. And I always go to those, and we have a cup of tea afterwards, and they sit down. And amongst the music, I get so much more information from those residents. Really good, clear steer of things. And also asking me things, which they would never do. They would never come to a formal meeting. So from that perspective, I think always drawing on, as you said, your community activities as well is really, really important. What I did find was that the area committee was really good for the councillors. So it was a chance for all the councillors in the area, and it's cross-party, to get together, and if nobody came to listen, then we could actually talk to the police or whoever happened to come. People that we are actually finding now quite hard to get hold of often, but they had to come to that meeting, and so we were able to share across wards issues and find out what the neighbouring wards felt about something, and that was really useful. And also obviously across city and county. I know that won't perhaps be the case in the future, but that was also very useful. We found that. And that's really it, that it was good for the whole area and good for the councillors, but don't forget the other smaller ways that you will get residents to talk, which they won't do in a sort of formal situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pounds. Councillor Howe.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I also had the pleasure to chair an area committee for a couple of years, South Area Committee meeting. And I actually always thought in principle it was a good idea, these area committee meetings. They were very informal. Just come and, talk to your councillors and officers. You didn't need much training for it. But the main problem was obviously that few people attended. And I guess there were potentially two issues for that, or two reasons for that. One of them was that the areas were not really that well defined, or not that it wasn't, sometimes wards were put together that didn't necessarily have that much to do with each other, so why should residents attend just to wait for their 2 minutes that were relevant to them? And another was possibly marketing, or simply calling these meetings committee meetings. I mean, that might have put people off. I mean, things like that. And I'm afraid, even though I really think it's great that we are discussing this now, I found the report quite confusing. I mean, I realize it's a high-level report, and starting the discussion, I didn't always see the meaning of these different boxes and why they were in the locations they were in and the colors they were in. I mean, I found it a bit hard to get a clear message from it, but okay, it's the starting point for this discussion, and then I think we agree now that it should be more focused on different areas and potentially different portfolios. So that's what I get out of this. So maybe more dedicated to individual wards and potentially protect particular issues. So this is at least what I get out of this. I have a few more specific questions. I think some of them overlap actually with Councillor Gardner-Smith's point. But my first point is, I mean, are there specific plans to involve resident associations and other local organizations in it? I mean, non-political organizations. That could be a starting point to find residents who are already involved in local issues, politics, or community work. And then I also have questions about the trigger points that I mentioned in Appendix 1. For example, no councillor-led engagement within the last 6 to 12 months. I mean, it sounds, I mean, what is expected from councillors then? I mean, are these events then more punishments for councillors who don't do anything themselves? Or, I didn't quite understand why these trigger points are needed. So what's expected from councillors? And yeah, I mean, how does this work together with these new engagement opportunities? And then also I had questions about the pilot exercises. So were these events that would have happened anyway? Are there any more planned? And is there a clear plan what you actually want to learn from them? So try a few different things, see what works best in terms of attendance, for example. And then finally, I mean, also getting back to the bigger picture maybe, will these be events where residents can talk to officers and the councillors are also there? Or are these events where residents are supposed to talk to councillors and with officer support? So, I mean, at that higher level, so what is your weighting there? And maybe that addresses also questions about the impact of these meetings in the future. So what are we, who is supposed to take action afterwards? Thank you.
I'll try and cover some and just listen to others, because we'll have to take some of it away. I wasn't around for the area committee, so I probably can't comment, but it's interesting just to hear experiences of them. And ultimately, some of this is evolution of that, so we do need to learn lessons around why people don't attend, which Vicky's sort of given a view on from just the Shaping Abbey and the Coleridge work that we've done, and work that we do all the time in communities, is going out to where they are, whether it be Romsey Music, whether it be the Big Lunch, is always key. But marketing something around a committee, I can imagine, does put people off. Again, just using examples, residents' associations have come to Shaping Abbey events in their capacity as a residents' association to share their experiences in that ward, and that would be certainly one. These don't exclude those sort of formal infrastructure that exists. I guess I'm not sure if this is where you were going with the question, but I wouldn't say that this is proposing supporting the growth of resident associations particularly. We have but I don't think that's okay. In terms of trigger points, I get no. This wasn't certainly a punishment exercise for those members not engaging. I don't think that's in my remit. I think this is to set some baseline of expectation that would happen in a local area, that there's an opportunity each year for a conversation to happen clearly, and it is not reflected well here, but could be after hearing from conversations tonight. All of the other methods that members engage with their local communities every day, every week. And the only place it does reflect that is about how we best support that. So one of the things we've reflected on is how much members do engage with their local communities, and we don't hear that. Unless it's a complaint that comes through, we don't get any sense of the things that are happening in a local community that we could then support or reflect on. And we've very practically thought about, is there any support for how casework is picked up, or any technological opportunities in which we have looked briefly at that would allow us to get even just the trends that are coming through door knocking. Otherwise, the richness of information that's coming, that happens on the front door or in the pub or in Romsey Music, we're completely blind to. So again, we're only really able to respond should something come through, either as a part of casework or a more formal structure. So that's probably where we have reflected it in the paper, but we haven't got every answer at the moment, is to try and pick that up. You've talked about pilots and lessons learned. If there's I'm not sure, we've tried to pick some of those lessons learned up, but if there's another part to that that I've missed, you can come back to me. Councillors, in terms of officers, we would absolutely, I think, how this has worked both in the larger shaping abbeys, but in the work we've been doing in North Cambridge, officers have been there to take away key actions that we've been reflecting on, whether that's more formally in the development of the design code for North Cambridge, whether that's in the second work around North Cambridge Framework for Change. Officers have been there to take on all of that feedback. And if this were the Cambridge Conversation proposal, is that we're proposing that would be led by members, as members see right for their community. If they wish an officer to attend to help facilitate a particular conversation, or to bring other officers or public service, health, police together, then that's why we've orientated our teams to be able to do that for you.
Ola, for you? Okay, yep. Councillor Swift.
Thanks, Chair. Just some observations along with Councillor Pounds and Councillor Holk about area committees. I was involved in the area committees during the lockdown years, and exactly the same as the other two. They were not very well attended by the public, partly because it was quite difficult to get through the waiting room procedure with the sort of lockdown technology being learned. But also it was a good opportunity for local councillors from different parties to actually talk with each other in an open and non-threatening way, and talking with the local police. Although I had very mixed experiences with talking with local police, because a lot of the time they seem to be covering their back rather than listening to genuine grievances from the public. Since the winding up of the area committees, in my ward of West Chesterton, we've gone sort of ultra-local. So, for example, I know this is also being done in King's Hedges. The first Saturday of every month, I have a drop-in session at the local cafe, 121 Cafe on Milton Road. And people come, and members of the public come with their problems. And on Saturday, there were a dozen people came with their difficulties. So it's actually a very, very grassroots, very, very down-to-earth way of actually communicating with the local residents in a way that any number of door-knocking sessions where you actually might talk with 50 people at very most in a session once a week, it just doesn't have as much opportunity to actually cut through. So that's one thing. The other thing that we've done is to have a lot more communication with residents' associations, and when there's a particular single issue area of concern, then I organise a single issue public meeting in the local library, and some of these are really well attended, up to 60 people, which is the maximum possible, and that's a very good way of actually allowing local residents to directly ask those responsible officers and councillors and area committee representatives from the GCP for example, to actually be democratically accountable. So that's had a big impact on helping residents feel that democratic connection is actually being built up rather than eroded. So I think all of those things have been very positive additions to local accountability and local democracy. Thank you.
Sorry, Richard, can I just ask again, the event at the library, was that organised by officers or did you do that?
I organised it, and the intention is to have, when there's an issue or concern, local concern that's got a lot of interest from casework, then we can actually respond to that by having a public meeting if the interest and concern warrants it.
Go on.
Just to follow on from that, so that, I mean, I guess one question is, with those types of more organic or kind of councillor-initiated conversations, is the intention with this plan that officers might, attend to support councillors in any follow-up?
Well, the idea is that the officers actually hear the concerns of the people that they're actually directly affecting. For example, Milton Road redevelopment was a big one. And then they can actually hear the strength of feeling for things like, I don't know, traffic lights on roundabouts, for example. And then they might actually respond to that more quickly than otherwise would.
I'd envisage that this is exactly the sort of Cambridge conversation, sort of less formal structure where, of course, members can ask for officer representation. And again, part of it, going to Abbey as an example, the structure we have in place means that you could go to someone, in this example, to Vicky's team, and they could facilitate the right officers or police or health to come to that meeting to try and make that intersection between the public, members and officers or public services easier and smoother.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, the important thing is that the officer, if they come from, I don't know, the GCP, they aren't just sort of meat for the mob to actually attack. It's a very positive, respectful environment. That the idea is that both sides can actually learn from each other. So it's a positive experience for everyone.
Okay, I think we have Councillor Griffin now, thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks to all the other councillors for sharing their experience with the area committees. I think one of the things we can take away from that is that, well, maybe one of the reasons why so few people attended is people are really busy. Most people are extremely busy just living, taking care of their kids, working. And the city council is kind of a distant, mysterious thing for most of our residents, right? So perhaps the best way to organize meetings, engagement, is to focus on have a very focused agenda on particular issues in the community, rather than an open-ended agenda for general discussion. I mean, when there's some concern in a community about some development or about some particular problem, focus it on that and keep it simple and advertise it well, you know, the meeting. And I think that maybe more people will engage then. But still, we can't expect to have a great deal of citizen involvement in decision-making because, like I said, people are just too busy. That's modern life, right? Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Glasberg.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I agree. I've been to a lot of area committee meetings and I agree with the points that have been made. They can be very useful, but often the people who attend do tend to be the same people and they do have the same points. So it's not very inclusive, and this approach could be a lot more inclusive. So I would welcome that, but I do agree that reading the documents here, it did feel a bit sort of vague and rather amorphous. So I felt a little bit concerned about that. I mean, we've had lots of meetings in Newnham where people are very vocal about particular issues that they're concerned about. And I agree that if that's what we need to, that is what we need to focus on. It is going to where people are, what they are worried about. They're not going to come to meetings to talk about things they're happy about. It is usually there's a problem. So that is our job, I think, to address that. But one thing that I think that, looking at your engagement mechanism document, one thing that I think, one area where I think that residents could contribute in a more positive way is on the 106 funding. We have discussed this before at the Environment and Community Scrutiny meeting. And it was on the agenda initially as a separate item here, which I think it would merit because I would like us to be able to look at how we could really engage residents in a process here that meant that there is more thought going into what kind of things in the community people might actually want, so that when the money is there, we can be looking at what it could be spent on, rather than a situation which I have seen happen several times where a development has happened, that it has to be in the planning application, what the 106 money is going to be spent on. So an officer makes a quick decision on something that might not be at all what the community wants because they haven't actually had any input. So looking at this, you've got section 106 and public art planning. You said it's subject to changes post-transformation. So I'd like to know a little bit more about that, what you think that might be. You've said triggered by a planning decision or 106 agreement. I'd like us to be able to go back a stage from that so that we are working with the community before then to look at what kind of things would be welcome in the community. And public art, again, I don't know, is that a priority for people in most wards? It seems to be something the council's keen to allocate money for, but I don't know how much that's something that residents would give great priority to. And I don't think we've got a really great record on public art. We've got Ariadne to the river, for example, and now we've got problems about Milton Road, where residents there are not happy about what's being proposed there in front of the library. And again, I just think we need to go back a stage. We need to be not commissioning these kind of works and then asking residents for their view on it. We should be going back and asking residents, do you want a work of public art? What kind of thing would you like? Where should it be? Before we're at the stage of commissioning things, having spent money on it, given a brief to an artist, which could then be not at all what people want. So, yeah, if you could just tell me what you're thinking about on this one. Because you said supporting local engagement process, notification of fund available. But as I say, I would like to see how could we go back a stage from that. Sorry.
I'll ask. I've got a couple of colleagues online that can give a bit more. The reason, so it was on the agenda. We're still going through internal processes to make sure that we understand how best to do it. So today is the opportunity, because we're talking about this as a broad topic, to hear from you. The idea is that we come back, I couldn't give you a definitive date to come back, where we can actually talk about all of the real specifics about how best to do that. But it is an opportunity to hear from your experiences today, and a couple of colleagues are online that can possibly give a reflection.
Yeah, I'm happy to add something if that's helpful, Sam. Hi, for those of you I haven't met, I'm Lynn Miles. I'm the Director for Economy and Place, and I am also the sponsor of our sort of Section 106 transformation project, which is going on at the moment. So the remit of what I'm doing is essentially starting to look at the process by which we deliver Section 106 projects. So it is, in truth, less focused on the negotiation, which is sort of technical matter for the planning service, and more on how do we get the right member engagement at the right times? How do we make sure that we deliver and prioritise those projects correctly and keep sort of, clear and accurate records, and making sure we're being as efficient as we can in terms of data storage. So I've been, I'm here in listening mode tonight as well, to sort of, because I know this is one avenue by which we hear views. If my colleague Heather, who's from the Shared Planning Service, wanted to jump in and correct me, she'd be most welcome to. There's a balance to be struck in the sense that Section 106 is essentially mitigation for sort of harm or burden imposed by planning. So the extent to which you say, if you develop this, you tower block and you bring, 50 new residents in, that will impose strain. It will impose strain on the road network, on the schools, on the health services, on leisure services. And so to an extent, there's a sort of technocratic discussion of what the harm caused by any particular development is and how it might be offset. But of course, there's some room for judgment in there. If we need more leisure facilities, what sort and what would the community like? And that's perhaps where we can get better at making sure we're feeding that in properly at the front end, I think. But Heather, if you want to correct me on any point of planning there, please do jump in.
Thank you, Lynn. That's really helpful. So I'm Heather Jones, Deputy Director of Greater Cambridge Shared Planning. So thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening, and thank you for your comments. As Lynn has said, we are in listening mode, so it's really useful and helpful to us that we hear from you. We are in the process of reviewing Section 106 ways of working, as Lynn has identified. That work hasn't progressed to its sort of conclusion. When it does, we will bring it back to members so that you have the opportunity to see what that looks like and have your opportunity to comment on that as well. A couple of points. There is the SPD Section 106 supplementary planning document is currently out for consultation, so everyone has an opportunity to add in any comments to that, and you will note there are that kind of technocratic points that Lynn has said about the mitigation for a development and what that looks like. So that document is out for consultation. So welcome any opportunity to have a discussion around that if that would be helpful. And then I think the second point to raise is that we have at Greater Cambridge Shared Planning made a substantial investment into a new IT system for our Section 106 obligations, to be able to allow our residents to freely search to see where money has been allocated and eventually spent through the Section 106 planning obligations. So that system is currently in the process of having data migration into it, so it's not fully formed as yet, and again we're really happy that we can demonstrate that. We have demonstrated it to the Residents Association that the Greater Cambridge Shared Planning Service holds, and we're very happy to demonstrate that if that would be helpful as well. So I don't think we're at a point yet to come with any specifics, because we haven't concluded the kind of work that we're doing, but rest assured that we will bring that back to you so that you can have your input into it. Thank you.
sorry, did you have any further comments? Councillor?
No, I mean, I'd like to say thank you very much for that. That sounds like a really positive step. Those are all areas that I think it would be very good for us to be able to look at. And I'm glad that we will have an opportunity to discuss this in this committee, hopefully at our next meeting or soon. Yeah, thank you.
Don't know when. Councillor Gardner-Smith, did you? Oh, Councillor Smith, sorry.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just in response to Councillor Glasberg, I could talk for hours about arts funding and trying to clarify the need to actually clarify the procedures and the art briefs and the democratic involvement. So the public art is actually, it does involve at each stage the public residents, and to try and stop mistakes being made. We had a recent public meeting about just one such thing, public sculpture, where the actual process was completely lacking. No consultation took place with the public and the local councillors, the local library, the local residents. And we need to actually learn from this and make sure that in future, any art commission, there's a clear brief, a clear process, a clear direction that involves at each stage involvement from and democratic accountability to local residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner-Smith.
Yeah, just to follow up on this, I mean, firstly, I would support Councillor Glasberg's comments about earlier involvement in the decision-making around Section 106, allocation within the, obviously the bounds of what is possible sort of legally and technically. On the public art, Councillor Pounds and I have had a sort of mixed experience over the last year, I would say. Very recently, we've had a positive experience with officers, but the problem has been that the process was very truncated. The money was not known about by councillors for a long time, and then finally it was a very, very tight timeline. And of course, as to Councillor Griffin's point, people are busy in communities, and even nice things like thinking about what public art people will want. It's really actually difficult to get people engaged. We did try and engage people in the development of the brief, but that's hard. It takes time to do that, and you can't do that on a really tight timeline. And so, those are some of the lessons I think we've learned with this, but support some of the comments that have been made already.
Okay, thank you for that. I think we have Councillor Pounds now. Thanks.
Thank you. It's just a brief point to say one of the things you haven't mentioned is that the actual physical places where these things are going to take place. So Abbey and some of the wards are very well off. I just noticed Richard said he used the library. I'd be interested to know whether they charge you. So my ward, Romsey, we don't have a library. We don't have a community centre other than a very small one tucked away, which is very expensive to hire. And not frequently available. So it's actually really difficult for councillors to meet residents in a comfortable space that's central or easily accessible on a regular basis. And that's something I think that would be really helpful if you kind of factored that into your plans when you're looking at what you're setting up, is to consider, because I'm sure Romsey is not the only ward that's in that sort of position.
Thank you. And then we have Councillor Payne.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this report. Just to echo some of the comments about area committees, I think the Western Central Area Committee was probably, by the sounds of it, one of the better attended. I went to North Area occasionally around some controversial issues, and of course it's the controversial issues where suddenly the room is very, very full. But I do know some of my, perhaps, I'll phrase this politely, perhaps some of my older residents who are less digitally engaged have expressed that they do quite miss area committees because they find the idea of emails quite challenging because perhaps they don't use email very often. I have a resident who is blind who now doesn't engage with the council because he used to be brought along to the area committee, but he finds it very difficult to send an email or pick up the telephone. So I think there is really a role there, although it may be a small number of people who we know quite well. I think those people's views are still important, and they are people who can be underrepresented in other aspects. When we move to more digital systems, they can miss out. So I think having that public forum is really important. I think one point that was very positive about the area committees was the councillor engagement. So we were all expected to be there was it 4 times a year? Is it quarterly, I think? And just the structure of that there were actions from each meeting, which are then followed up on each time. I think that gave the public a real confidence that their concerns were listened to, and they'd know that next meeting we had to report back on what we'd done about what we said we were going to do. So there's kind of the accountability there, and I think people felt they were reassured by that. So I think in terms of the structure of what we move to going forward, having that kind of more formal structure behind it, where there's a regular occasion which councillors have to attend, it's open to, all councillors should be there for that area where it's broken down. And there is some tracking of the actions and the follow through and who's owning different things and taking responsibility. I think that's important to make sure it is a productive meeting rather than just a talking shop about different issues. My main sort of question around it was, obviously we're looking at this now with a couple of years before local government reform. Obviously the areas surrounding Cambridge have parish councils. We're quite different to that. I just wanted to ask whether there's any view of how this will fit in with that move to a unitary authority, and is this something that could continue into that, or are we looking potentially at quite a short-term kind of placeholder?
It's a good question. I think it's sort of a default question for every discussion at the moment. We are actually discussing this amongst all districts and others at the moment, because we have to put together our business cases to government, and this is a section of the business case. I don't think that this is a short-term piece of work, because what we found from the work from New Local, which wasn't about engagement of city residents, because parishes work perfectly, it was quite a general piece of work which picks up best practice from across the country. So there is no proposal in LGR that parishes change, but I think that this type of approach on a refinement of the triggers and things like that would equally apply to an area that is going through significant change. I can't speak for how effective parish councils are. I'm sure they're a variety of how they work, and how involved, how engaged residents are in that process. But yeah, I think that this would equally apply to parished areas. I'm sure there would be some overlap. I'm sure parishes would have a say in that. I just wanted a reflection on a couple of comments about clearly the busyness. We've learned quite a lot from Abbey. We've moved geographies in terms of different locations. We thought we were at the Baptist Church, which in Barnwell, which worked very, very well. Then we tried to move it a bit further south in the ward to the football club. Lovely venue, completely died a death. We moved it back. So we are almost every time trying to find the right balance. And Vicky said, a balance between issue-based discussion, which clearly was a predominant trigger for the work 18 months ago. But actually, what we found is a lot of the time people don't know what they don't know. And being present and consistent in sort of how we're framing some of this, so that you can bring forward things that are going on around people, because their lives are incredibly busy, and why should they keep a check on every single document that's being published and things that are going on? It's worth probably us sharing after committee for committee. We drew a bubble diagram of all of the things happening in Abbey at that time. Now, clearly people won't care about all of them, but having a space that they know they can come, and we've adapted the structure of the event so that actually it's like a marketplace for the first hour and a half. People can just come after school, come after work, bring their kids and hear from the police, from GCP, from the GP, from Abbey people, and hear what's going on. And then that sort of triggers sometimes interest, and sometimes the things that they didn't know the GP was changing, and that's a big issue for individuals. So we are trying to find that balance between the fact that yes, people are busy, so they'll only sometimes attend the thing that really agitates them, but quite often they're busy, so they don't know that things are going to happen. We've talked about how for members to get earlier in the Section 106 conversation. Some of our structure around this is about how people are enabled to hear things early enough that it doesn't agitate them, because we've caught their agitations earlier, if that makes sense. That balance isn't easy, and that's why we sort of adapt every quarter in Abbey as we go.
Thank you. Any other questions from the team? Oh, Councillor Smith.
Just about the S106 application procedure. Thinking back to some of the applications that I've tried to make, I don't particularly like the idea of each ward having to sort of jump through hoops with a sort of to try and justify why their particular things are worthy of the most of the funding. I prefer it to really be an allocation is given to wards, and then you decide what you want to do with it according to the local residents and needs. I thought it was quite difficult actually trying to win some money for a worthwhile cause in my ward and someone else in another ward trying to get the same money. I don't particularly like that mechanism. I think there are better ways of doing it.
Okay, thank you. If no one else has got any comments, then I'll maybe kind of chip in with mine. So just thinking about my experience in Queen Edith's, we have had two big developments at the southern tip of the ward, which is a big issue, and that has then, excited a lot of interest. So we've had community forums, really beautifully supported by a communities officer, and that has generated a lot of interest, a lot of people coming to the meetings. So that is it's a very visible and very, not contentious exactly, but people are very interested in it. And it's sort of easy to get people to come along. And it has been a few of the same people coming along, but it has been a reasonably wide variety of people coming each time. And so I think those kind of issues, we've got, if you look on page 13, the four different types of suggested engagement, that shaping neighbourhoods, and in Abbey clearly there's big changes going on. A lot of discussion is kind of helpful and good to get out in the public domain. So I think for those wards where something like that is happening, that is will trigger a discussion and a natural way of bringing people in. So I think that it has worked very well in Queen Edith's, and I'm sure it is, it sounds like the stuff in Abbey has gone quite well as well. If we, and I think residents in Queen Edith's are relatively well informed and engaged people, but if I advertised a meeting to them and talked about, the council agenda for the next year, I'm not sure how many people would turn up. So us keen beans would, but you're talking about the balance of getting sort of the information out. What about a ward where nothing's happening? How do we get in contact with people who are, without big issues? And I think Councillor Pound's experience of just talking to people who come to local events, that to me is, it sounds a very good way of doing it. But each ward is going to be very, very different. And so in my mind, I'm not, each ward will have different constellations and coverage of residents' associations. It will have different community organisations. In our ward, we now have a community centre, but we didn't for a very long period of time. We've got no children's facilities. So it's how do we, so I'm not quite clear from, the shaping neighbourhoods approach I think works very well, but I'm slightly concerned that if there's nothing going on in the community, nothing will happen. So what I'm trying to, so what is the structure? Let's say you're a new councillor coming in, and the council comes to you and says, well, we want to engage with residents in your ward. What sort of information will be there to say this is how you might do it? Because I take the point that you said you were blind. I think that was a very kind of light bulb moment for me. Well, officers, don't know perhaps what's going on, or whether there is a residents association or not. So how are you going to know about how to get that message out, or what's your involvement been? I think traditionally it's been councillors who are kind of in charge of all of that, and and in connection. But if we're now pulling in the officers to talk about particular issues or changes, I'm not quite clear how we're marrying that up. I think it's the job of a councillor to be out in those events and talking to people, like the music events in Romsey, and hearing from people, which is great. But I'm not clear how we then sort of hook that into an accountable thing that officers get involved in. I think it's very hard to do, and I'm. The good things that we have heard tonight about area committees is that all the councillors get together, they get to meet people who are hard to reach, like the police, and sorry, I don't mean to pull them out particularly, but and maybe get in touch with other officers of the like the ones you outlined, Sam, in the various departments, in that the various teams in your department. So it's yeah. I think it's hard. One is very, very casual. The area committees are really formal. You've got big issues that will come up, and people will want to come and hear about what's happening. But then everything else, I think it's very difficult. I mean, the Cambridge Conversations thing as well is kind of interesting. It sounds great, but I kind of worry that it's a bit too, council agenda, and people won't turn up to that. So a multi-agency meeting, perhaps with all the ASB teams, the police, and everyone, and just say, we're going to have a sort of conference about what's going on in the ward. I do like your last option, which is providing the various basic bits of information about the ward, like, I don't know, car accidents, incidents of ASB, all that kind of thing. I think that would be really helpful to know, because at the moment it's very hard to find, or at least I do find so. So some kind of regular reporting to councillors on the information of their ward, or making it publicly available. I don't know, like, have a web page for each ward and have sort of the very basic information, the information that we're talking about, available there publicly. I think that would be really helpful. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I like all the contributions for the discussions or the comments made on the Section 106. I think that also could be on that page and get people involved. The first step is knowing that the money is there, and that's sometimes quite hard. Well, it is very hard to find and get hold of. And then the deadlines of when it needs to get spent as well sometimes, I think, drives bad decision making. So that's sort of also part of the discussions that need to happen. So I mean, thinking about what residents are involved in. There's the tenants, so they're very worried about their housing. We've got big developments happening. We've got, I suppose, Section 106 money that might be spent. What else that we should be thinking about? Yeah. So I think I've talked at length, but without kind of I think my key concern with all of this is it's going to be very unstructured. Councillor coming along is not going to know unless we say, look, for every ward or for every ward, we would say, look, there's the opportunity to have this kind of meeting in the ward, you know, once a year or twice a year if you want to have it. It will be supported. There'll be this information webpage up, and officers will be available to attend other, you know, latch on to other meetings, I don't know, and to have a sort of prescription of possible things sort of written down for people, so that they know that they can call on these things. I think would help structure it a little bit, because otherwise if you don't know that you can call on and create a development forum, you can't suggest that to residents, and you can't make it happen. So I think I would ask that whatever we go for, there is a sort of menu for councillors to say, well, we can do X, Y, Z in our ward, you know, and have the information and knowledge that they can get supported in a certain kind of way by officers. What was the other third thing? Oh yes, the communities who are seldom heard. I heard you say things like the Roma community, which is great, and we've had a comment about someone who's blind. But then what about, I mean, Cambridge is multi-ethnic, you know, so we've got 50 native languages in one school here. What about everyone else? I mean, are we thinking about how to reach people who are not native English speakers or minority groups, like Bangladeshi community, for example? Is that going to be, we talked about very much a ward process. Is that going to be a separate, you know, process alongside, or it's just going to be, well, in this ward there is a large Bangladeshi community, so we're going to have a Bangladeshi outreach discussion, you know, particular discussion there? Or is that going to be completely like the minority groups, disabled people, is that going to sort of go along parallel to, or is it going to be part of the ward? I mean, I think that's a question I would have in general. You don't have to answer now. Yeah. Okay. Anyone got any other further feedback?
Can I just come back, use it as a bit of a discursive? There was a question raised about ambition at the beginning, with a couple of examples: participatory budgeting, citizens' assembly. There are examples in the paper. We have, in the paper, actually suggested a potential pilot of participatory budgeting. We haven't got into the detail. There's lots of different ways you can do that, but it would be interesting to hear from the committee about your views on whether that is that would take us some time to go away and work up something and bring it back and trial it. But I'm just interested in the ambition of members in that space, because I think it was a very legitimate ask. There are, you know, you could settle for the fact that we have public questions, you're democratically elected, you have casework, and that is your sort of, that is the baseline, and that everything we're proposing is, whether it's vague or slightly obscure, it didn't mean to be, but a sort of further tiers of the opportunities for us to listen and engage and hear and act. You've challenged us in question about that ambition. I'd be keen to pass that back and just get a sense about where we might wish, or where you might wish to take that, so that we could come back with some.
Anyone want to comment on that? Councillor Pounds.
Yes, very much. We would like you to have some ambition, because, as you say, we do all those things, but we, and Councillor Gardner-Smith and I have worked on a few cases. It's really hard for us sometimes to contact people like the police, some officers, whereas something that facilitates us in our work that you're proposing, I think would be very, very welcome. Thank you.
Councillor Haug.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the answers we often have to give to residents is, well, this is not within our powers, we can't do this or this or this. I think it would be good to have just clear examples of what decisions can be influenced and how, and that's, I think, where area committees were actually quite useful. I mean, if people were there, because there were councillors there as well as officers who could say, yeah, I mean, this is not something we can do, this is something we could do, and then it would be clearer where the voice of councillors, or how the voice of councillors can potentially influence decisions. And what I also still remember from the area committee meetings, we got reports about environmental issues, about antisocial behavior, the statistics for a ward and things like that, and I think they were always good to look at. So even if people maybe, some people complain all the time about a certain thing, if you then have the statistics there and the maps and everything, that helps, I think, sometimes a lot to guide the discussion.
Councillor Gardner-Smith.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly would support a deeper look into participatory budgeting around the grants programme, or what you've described in the paper.
Well, I mean, I would too. I really like the idea of citizens' assemblies. I think a mechanism for instituting that would be quite good on, particular issues that are very, very contentious, for example, that are, you could put that are sort of more long-term. I think that would be really exciting to do. I mean, I'm an accountant, so participatory budgeting slightly horrifies me. I mean, I think it's a really good thing to do, but just the process is, oh gosh. It's, yeah, because there is a certain leeway that you have, the overall financial budget of the council is fairly, the envelope is fixed. And it's very often a question of, do you spend it here or there, rather than do you spend the money at all? So it's quite tricky, I think, to do. Very tricky.
Thank you. I was just going to say some examples of where we could use participatory budgeting. Very often we get last-minute availability of funds. They might be from partners, it might be from the police or health services or other areas within the public sector where quite quickly we have to spend money at a local level. A lot of the time, those last-minute decisions are made by officers. So we could look at some examples of where we have wider conversations, and coming back to Councillor Glasberg's point about involving local residents at an earlier stage, thinking about, well, how do we think about those priorities before money might land in our pocket quite last minute? And another example where we've got quite small pots of money, but actually it does make a big difference to local people, is where we've got new communities. So particularly currently in the city, Eddington, Darwin Green and Springstead Village all have pots of community chest fundings. That's small pots of money of up to £500. There's a couple of £1,000 in those pots of money for each development site. And again, currently, decisions are made at an officer level. So there could be ways of exploring how we involve local people in those. And I'd be really open to a conversation with local councillors about opportunities to explore that.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful. And, the other thing I would say to that is, there's a couple of big developments in my ward. I had no idea that they existed. So there is an element of, that the ward information needs to be able to cover all these things that might possibly happen, so that councillors are, I mean, if you've been a councillor for 20 years, maybe you know that exists. But I certainly didn't, and I'd love to know about it.
Yeah, I was just going to respond to what you said, Vicky, about, I would see this really in terms of creating a wish list, if you like, for each ward. So that, and again, we would need to manage expectations from residents that this wasn't all going to happen. But at least it would mean that when a development came up or when there was some funding available, we could then look at what people had said were their priorities and see what it might be possible to fund, and carry out consultation based on something that we'd already got about what people's priorities might be.
Okay, thank you. Any more on this? Okay, so I think we want to say, if I can just summarise it quickly, and please feel free to add to what I'm saying, is that we generally like the direction of travel. We like the idea of ambition, so citizens' assemblies, participatory budgeting, great idea. The information available of what might happen or what the tools are for these engagement with residents needs to be very clearly written down and easy to understand and easy to find for residents, for councillors. And the sort of the information on the ward, I think we all thought was kind of useful. We definitely liked, I think, generally the idea of a wish list, so that can be used actually for Section 106 money, for other monies that might come up, and be available for. We're kind of quite concerned about the trigger points, because previously it was in the Constitution, it was very clear about when something would happen. So I think we'd like to understand generally about what would start this process off, or would it be entirely councillor-led, maybe? That's fine. One of the things that we liked about the old area committees was that it gave you councillors a chance to reach people like the police and maybe other teams within the council to get together in one place. And then also that it was quite an accountable forum, and things that were promised were then tracked and made sure that they were delivered. So somehow, if that can be reflected maybe in the structures that we put in place. We mentioned that in some wards it was actually difficult to arrange somewhere to meet because there isn't any centre to meet. The other thing was meetings where there are big issues are easy to attract people, but other slightly less contentious and more mundane stuff that's nevertheless very important and interesting, might be very interesting to residents who are extremely busy, is going to be perhaps quite hard to find. Does anyone feel I've missed anything out? Councillor Pounds?
I don't think you mentioned it, but it was really useful for councillors in the area, so across wards in that area, to actually have a formal chance to get together to discuss issues that affected everybody.
All right, are we ready to note the report? I'm seeing nods all round. Excellent.
Chair, would I be able just to, I wasn't sure when to pop in with a couple of reflections. Is it possible just to say a couple of words?
Go ahead, Councillor Smith. Thank you. Yep.
Thank you. I mean, firstly, just to say I've been writing away for the whole of the meeting. It's so helpful, and it's wonderful to see so much agreement both within the committee and also with the direction of travel. I was trying not to fist pump when a few people were mentioning the idea of us having a wish list for funding as it comes in, because that's something I've been pushing on for quite a while now, and I'm really keen to get into this project. So I'm so glad that other people are also raising that, because I think that's something we really should be pushing on. I did just want to reflect on a couple of things. First of all, I think Councillor Payne, I think you were asking about new unitary. Apologies if I've noted that down. For me, I think this is a really good opportunity for us to set the tone of how we can't control necessarily what a new unitary does, but I think we can say this is how we see excellent quality democratic engagement in our communities, what that's going to look like, and hopefully that will help us set the tone. So I see this work as incredibly important in standing up for our communities, not just in the current council, but in any new council that comes forward. I did very much, Chair, like your reference to the keen beans being involved. I think for me, that's always been something. How do we avoid something just being the usual suspects all the time? And particularly, how do we avoid something? It's not that those of us who are interested in politics shouldn't have a say, but how do we broaden that out? And I was very struck by Sam's point that often we're very quick as a council, I think, to say, but we did consult. But actually, the point is, if people didn't know we consulted, we need to consult differently. We need to ensure that we really are involving people. So that's a real takeaway for me. Really interested in hearing that. And the other reflection I would have is that I think we probably are going to need a multiplicity of approaches. For instance, the argument around the digital divide. For some people, digital is a complete nightmare. For some people, it is their only way of contributing. So I think the more options that we have that involve as many people as possible, I think is fabulous. I'm just really encouraged and excited by what I've heard this evening. There's so many good points. I know that officers will also have been noting all of those points that have been made. So I'm looking forward to continuing the discussion and hopefully coming back here with some concrete proposals in due course.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Right, okay, so let's now move on to item 6, which is the herbicide-free weed management programme. We have here an update on the Council's transition to herbicide-free weed management as requested by members of this committee. I'll hand over to Alistair Wilson, Assistant Director for Public Realm and Environment, to introduce the report. And I believe Councillor Martin Smart will then have a word as well.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thanks for the opportunity to update on the transition to herbicide-free. We're currently working around the city in a programmed way with 4 wards now largely complete. Our 4-on, 4-off shifts, cleansing teams have also been on targeted work in the city centre. So the shift from herbicide-free is delivering some significant environmental benefits, but it does require more time and some staff. So we've ordered second machinery to support the ward cleaning and the programme, and we're on track for a March 26 finish with some flexibility now to respond to local priorities. So I'm happy to take questions, happy to have a discussion. Thank you. Not sure if Martin wants to follow on with some points.
Thank you, Alistair. Councillor Smart?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Alistair. So this is, it's not just about me, it's about the council. The council has initiated this work citywide, herbicide-free, and obviously I support that. I'm very much in favour of it, and I'm determined to do my very best to see that work through to the end of this council and to the next authority that takes over from it, which is a pertinent point, I think, that we need to, as was said earlier with regard to other things, that we are doing what we want to do here in this council, and it's something that we hope will continue in the next authority that takes over from us. So it's not just us doing it. There are other authorities around the UK that are herbicide free, not in significant number, I think about 50 odd. So that's quite a big number, but there are many, many authorities in the UK. So we're still at the cutting edge of this work, really. And it is true also to say that some authorities have tried to do this and failed, and then gone back to using herbicide, which is what I mean when I say that I'm determined to do my very best to see this project through to the very end, if I can, or onward, let's say. So there's a lot to say about weeds, surprisingly, and I'm sure we'll say a bit this evening about them. I think to cut to the chase, you know, weed is something that's growing where it shouldn't be growing. Otherwise, it's pretty subjective, really, and it can even be subjective in terms of that. So, and I said cut to the chase. So the chase is that, you know, if it's a big old thing growing waist high where it shouldn't be on the pavement, then it's wrong. And that's what we're aiming to do as a council, to remove those weeds. And it's a multifarious thing. There are things growing on our open spaces, on our pavements and roads, verges, and different people have different approaches. So as is alluded to in the report and even said at the very end, just a few words on this, is that, you know, some of our residents are keen to, as all people do, they have different approaches to life generally. Some residents are keen to see totally sterile environments, so nothing growing anywhere in terms of weeds on the street, different obviously on open spaces. But then other people, other residents, other groups are keen to promote growth, and they want things growing on verges and around their houses, and you see that. And I've had conversations with residents one-to-one and in groups about that, about, you know, please don't remove these things growing along this alleyway, we love them, sort of thing. And then other people will say the exact opposite. And it's totally subjective, but that's a sort of an aside issue. I did start with the most important issue, which is that, you know, if there are significant weeds growing, which are a mess, then they will be removed, and removed by people and machinery, not by poisons. And just on that, I mean, I was amazed how poisonous this stuff must be, because I've seen them spraying a few years ago, up to a few years ago, when we stopped using it. You know, a little bit of spray, you know, I sort of thought nothing much, not of much consequence. But it is, I mean, it must have been so poisonous to kill everything that would otherwise have grown and is now growing now. And just to say this year's been a really good year for weeds and everything else, you know, fruit, potatoes, it's all growing really well. It's been a good year. But, you know, that's not good for residents who want the weeds removed. And there are other factors. I could go on for a long time, Chair, but I'll try and keep it short. But, you know, since we started the herbicide policy, we've, you know, weeds have had a good chance to get going, basically, and we're working hard to get back on an even keel there. I think, as Alistair perhaps mentioned, by the time we get to March 26, we'll have cleared all the weeds, and then the next year will be much easier and better, regardless of how well the weeds grow, because we'll have had that year of removing bigger weeds, and, you know, things like self-seeding, sycamores, that kind of thing, need to be removed, you know, physically with sort of people and machinery, much more so than some sort of smaller things. So I think I'll stop there, Chair. I could carry on, but I'll perhaps say some more if there are questions, and thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Pounds.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for that, Alistair. Just to confirm from my experience, I mean, talking to residents, nobody wants us to go back to spraying. Nobody has said, oh no, I'd rather you sprayed and cleared the weeds. But there is some concern, and I wondered if you could tell me a little bit, because you know my ward, we have narrow Victorian streets, we have heavily parked cars, and they were causing quite a problem in terms of clearing the weeds. And when you did come around in, I think, the spring, the weeds coming out between the pavements and often between the houses and the pavement, because there's no front garden, they were cleared and vastly improved. They have obviously grown back again over the summer, but that was great. But what's not been cleared are the curbsides. And so there are weeds growing, and they've not been swept, as far as I can see, the whole summer. And it's very difficult to sweep them because of the cars, but they've become quite blocked. And quite a few residents have mentioned the fact that they're a bit concerned about flooding, about and the road, the drains being blocked, and the problems that might cause in the future. So it'd be helpful if you had any information on that, please.
Yeah, we've been quite fortuitous up to this point, because some of the wards we have been working and have got fairly wide streets and quite a lot of parking. So when we move into areas of Romsey, Petersfield and Newham, we are going to have to change methods. So we are looking at, we've got some advanced warning signs that we're going to put up. So asking people not to park in those streets ahead of time. So when we start to do the work, not to say we can work around those vehicles and come back at later dates. So the intention is to try and speed up the operation and make sure we actually get into these difficult spaces, is to ask residents to remove cars. Obviously quite a challenge. So any help with that from local people or ward councils would be helped, just in terms of door knocking, letter dropping. It was done successfully in Newham with a bit of help from local people, so it is achievable, but but obviously takes a little bit of time and a little bit of preparation and planning.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner-Smith.
Thanks very much. Councillor Pounds picked up some points with regards to sort of the nature of our ward in Romsey. I just wanted to go back to the report itself and just ask a couple of questions. What I wasn't clear on is whether what's being proposed is essentially a sort of deep clean once a year, and then what capacity there is, you know, at times otherwise to do any kind of spot cleaning or kind of problem areas. To me, I mean, you know, we were grateful that we did have a sort of spot clean in Romsey in the spring, but, you know, already the weeds are back and in some areas, you know, quite substantial. And so once a year feels to me like it doesn't really sync with the ecology of weed growth. and I would be, so I think it'd be just helpful to understand, you know, to clarify that point really. And is this, you know, is that what is possible with the current resource that you have? Because I noted in the report the kind of substantial increase in time that it takes you to do a sort of 100 metres worth of street as a result of the shift. And just, I mean, obviously just to echo Councillor Pounds and others that, you know, I fully support our move to a herbicide-free council, so I really want to be supportive and constructive of this approach.
Okay, yeah. So I think what we, as we continue moving through the city, we are learning, and we're learning quite a lot. And one of the things we have learned is a sort of 4 days on programme. So 4 days doing scheduled work, things we know we're going to do, but there are items that do pop up through the week that possibly do need some focus. So to be able to go on to specific things, we can do that on a possibility. At the moment we're doing on a Friday. So we also stepped off programme as well for when the school terms had broken. We took the opportunity to do all the school frontages and routes to schools when there's no children about. The other thing we have learnt is in terms of the timing it's taken to do this work. Although it's slow at the moment, we have been going back to some areas, for instance, in Arbury, which was part of the trial at the very early days, so has had 3 years without any treatments. We can go around quite quick once we've done the deep clean. So the reality is, I suspect, and this is purely forecast, we will get round at least each ward at least 3 times a year after we've done the first initial clean. So we're able to speed up the mechanisation, speed up the process, and therefore be in the wards more frequently. And just finishing off on that point, we can pick up things that come direct through to are reported to us maybe 1 day a week.
Okay, that was very helpful. Councillor Haug.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I fully support, of course, our move towards to go herbicide-free. I'm personally sort of accept that, you know, I would rather have a bit more weeds than have you know, poison on my doorstep. But of course, there's unfortunately some, according to my mailbox at least, I mean, some residents disagree. So they want clean streets. They think it's the frontline service that they can expect from the council. And I mean, sometimes I'm afraid, I mean, there is evidence, you know, that things are not going very well on our street. Some corners can look a bit like an urban jungle. So maybe the easy solution would be to simply call Cambridge a garden city. But I guess not a very practical solution. So let's maybe look at the numbers. And I must say, I had to laugh out loud for a moment when I saw that Trumpington is up in February 2026. That's the end of winter. So that means nothing's getting done this year at all, which I wish I had known a bit earlier, so I could have told residents rather than say, okay, they're coming. So I just wasn't really sure what was going to happen. And I also have to say, I commend Councillor Smart for joining the fight in Trumpington a few times, getting his hands dirty with us to clean some of the streets. And as has been mentioned before, there are obvious reasons for why it's taking longer now, but it does take a lot longer. So therefore, I've got just a few questions also on behalf of my residents. And one question is, I mean, will all streets be cleaned, for example, in quieter residential areas, where I think some residents simply expect that their neighborhood is clean in the quieter streets. And I think more important for me, I mean, are there any clear, metrics, or is there a clear message of what residents will be able to expect in the future, that we can say, this is now what the standard is, and we can all defend it. And they know, at what point they would have a reason to complain, because I think that relates to the area of public perception and managing expectations. For example, in table 9.2, and I think there it looks like public perception is mostly quantified in terms of costs, but obviously it's much also about appearance and what people perceive as well-being. Is their well-being that might be affected by the weeds growing around, also possible cost, due to damage to streets and street furniture. So one question is there anything at least that one can do in wards like Trumpington that are up only early next year to at least deal with some of the most excessive weed, where it, for example, affects drains and blocks footpaths and things like that. That would be reassuring to know that that's dealt with efficiently. And I think I also agree with some of the conclusions that it's an opportunity to engage communities and say, hey, you can sort this out yourselves, get together, a bit like litter picking. But the obvious question, of course, the obvious response we usually get when I dare to suggest that is, what do we pay council tax for? I guess that's what everybody hears quite regularly. And yes, I'm happy to manage expectations when I'm out there, but at the same time, I think we have to have good answers. We have to be able to really show the evidence and say what can be expected and why might some people not be fully satisfied in the end. Thank you.
Okay.
Would it be helpful? Sorry, Chair. Would it be helpful if I just clarify a few points in terms of just managing expectations? So, I think, just for clarification, the herbicide-free it covers streets, it covers communal spaces, it covers the public realm. So we are working in a whole range of different environments, and particularly with Trumpington, there is a unique pressure within Trumpington, which is around new sites, new growth sites. They have permeable pavers. Those permeable pavers have a lot of space for weeds to grow. They need to be treated. So I hear Councillor Hawke's concerns about managing expectations in Trumpington. If we can get people to start reporting through the website, we can actually come off programme, as I discussed earlier. So if there are specific things or specific problems in wards in Trumpington, we can take off one day a week potentially to do that targeted work to try and address concerns that you're getting in your inboxes and emails. And I hear that point. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Swift.
Do you want to go first? Okay. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, lots of things about the herbicide-free. Obviously, I do support it. It has had quite a lot of teething problems in West Chesterton. Anne Rivington was very keen with the Happy Bee experiment. And the first couple of years, you got masses of weeds growing up everywhere, and people were complaining that it was looking like a sort of dystopic movie. And then she said, well, we are learning on a learning curve about this. No one's ever done this before. There are teething problems, and it's a lot more work than just spraying with herbicides. So there's lots to learn about how to manage weed growth where it's not wanted, particularly, for example, in gutters, where it can look like a sort of very, very rough and run down and not attractive, where the weeds actually are growing in the curbs and gutters in such a way that it just looks totally uncared for. So that is a difficulty, actually, balancing that. So coming on to what Councillor Holt said about local resident participation. For example, Hurst Park Estate, they've completely transformed the Milton Road entrance to their estate with plants and meticulously going and planting wildflowers in certain areas, but actually maintaining the gutters and picking out every individual weed in other parts of the street. So that can work very well. Things like watering the trees on Milton Road, we got 94 new trees planted. There was a water machine watering them over the summer, but we've encouraged through newsletters for people to actually water their trees and maintain their gutters as a sort of public service type thing. If you see your tree outside wilting and leaf fall, then actually go out and do something about it rather than just relying on the council to do it for you. The main thing for me is the park cars and leaf mould and block drains. And once again, it's a little bit like the weeds in the gutters, that it can look, it comes to March and there's still the leaf mould blocking the drains and everything. So it is about actually those signs and actually saying that the next week, between Monday and Tuesday, can you not park your car in this residential neighbourhood because it's going to be deep cleaned. And I think that there needs to be engagement with local residents and residents associations and councillors to make sure that the public in those streets are aware of what's going to happen and that it will actually be done on the time exactly that it says it's going to be done, so you don't not park your car and then nothing comes. I think those are my main points. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Swift. Councillor Glasgow.
Yes, I've got 3 main points that I'd like to make about this. Obviously, we've discussed it several times before at the Environment and Community Scrutiny Committee, and I'm really pleased that the scheme is up and running and it is now going to be done in all wards. But I do still have some concerns that I did raise at the last meeting when you showed us the programme for the which was ward-based, because I do feel I can understand why this seems good in organisational terms, but basically, as Councillor Gardner-Smith said, the problem is that herbicide, that this kind of control of weeds is seasonal rather than, you know, obviously, in the spring and the summer, the weeds are growing, and we have had problems in my ward, and I think probably in others, with residents complaining about nettles in particular. We're keen on active travel, but if nettles are blocking footpaths, then people are not wanting to go on them. And in the autumn, now we're getting to a time where every ward wants to have the gutters cleaned, and that they're complaining that the drains are getting blocked. So I just want to know, how do you feel that that is actually working? And also the new equipment, how is that working? And the second point I wanted to know about is that you said that you were going to need to liaise with the county highways in particular. Obviously, we have the issue that the City Council is responsible for cleaning the gullies, but the County Council deals with the drains. So it's a question of actually synchronising that so that they can be done at the same time. And I just wondered whether you have had to actually get the county highways to actually do any TTROs to deal with park cars, or whether you've been able to deal with this successfully, as we did in Newnham, as you said, through actually informing residents about it. And the third point that I wanted to ask you about is about the managing expectations. When we talked about this before, you had a communications plan which had been discussed with the working party that included members of Pesticide Free Cambridge and On the Verge. I don't think that group has met since May, is it? And I just wondered, are you still proposing to have that group going forward, working on this communications plan, and what is being done about communicating this with residents? And finally, another point is that what we're doing in the wards is just a small part of the areas where pesticides are being used and herbicides. Obviously, there's a lot of private places, including the colleges, for example, and Cambridge University land, where this is not happening at the moment. And I think that from what I hear from Pesticide Free Cambridge, they have had meetings with the colleges and spoken with groups there, and they are keen to work on this, but probably it would benefit from some liaison and help with the council. So just wonder if you could comment on that as well. Thank you.
Alistair?
Yeah, should I take that now, Chair? So in terms of how the equipment is working, it is working really well. We took quite a long time to choose what we were going to use. It is probably the best in the industry. It is very quick when it does work, and it works really efficiently. So it's one pass followed by another machine that clears up with it. So in terms of, we are looking to buy a second to speed up. They're relatively inexpensive. We're talking low-end thousands, and rather than larger sweeping machines. In relation to the point around the gutters, yes, we do need to work with the county council. They have a programme which is not aligned to ours, unfortunately. They have a different timescales for their clearance of their gutters. The point I would make at this moment is around leaves. We'd have a different regime for managing leaves in gutters. So for instance, we've got a second sweeper at the moment on hire, which is about to start dealing with autumn leaf fall. That is more likely to cause blockages in street gutters, so we are on top of that. We haven't used any TTROs at this point because we've been relying on people's goodwill and people moving their cars, and that seems to work. If we explain to them thoroughly when it's likely to be and how long, we're not expecting people to leave their cars off street for any more than 15 to 20 minutes as we pass through. It's a fairly quick operation. In terms of managing expectations, yes, we have got a comms plan. I will pick up with our communications team again after tonight, just to make sure we have got further work around social media. I think that might have fallen off the side of the table, amongst other things. We will certainly continue with Pesticide Free Cambridge and On the Verge, because they were part of the initiation, part of the very early beginnings of this scheme, and they're a fundamental part to support us through it. And just to make you aware, we have attended a few national conferences where we've been asked to speak about our approach. So, and again, Herbicide Free Cambridge and On the Verge have been instrumental in helping us with that approach. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does any more points? Councillor Payne.
Thank you, Chair. So I think we're really excited to see that this is happening and kind of establishing itself across the city. So when Councillor Porrer, I think, first brought forward the idea of a herbicide free city, it was framed around a trial to start with. And so we spent quite a lot of time trialling using the different methods, like the brushes in different wards, to see the impacts. And I think one of the things which I'm just quite surprised by is, first of all, like the rate of the growth at first, when some of our streets, like in Castle, I can see we're the last ward to be cleaned, so we've got to wait until March next year. But some of our streets have like small trees growing at the side of the curb, which people do find, I think, just quite overwhelming, even when you've explained to them what the purpose of it is. So I just wondered, really, when we did the trial, did we realise quite how rapid that growth was going to be? Because I mean, I'm just concerned there are some cracks appearing in the pavements as well, based on where the roots are growing through. And did we also realise, because I don't feel perhaps we had the opportunity to appreciate just how much more complex this would be, meaning our streets are being swept less. So I just wondered, is that something that the trial revealed to us, or is it something that we've now found since trying to do it at scale across the city?
Yeah. So in terms of you, yes, Councillor Payne, you are correct. There are some things that grow quicker than others, and Budley is one. Birch is another. Sycamore is another. We have spent a bit of time off programme dealing with where we get quite a lot of that growth. So Elizabeth Way is a significant problem, for example. So we can't come off, as I say, come off programme and deal with specific things. And if Castle is causing concerns, we can have a look in terms of where it sits in that programme. It's not rigid. We can be flexible. It was just set in a sequential order, going around the city in a clockwise direction. Just unfortunate that Castle's last. And in terms of the street cleaning, we're still doing the litter collection, litter picks, the street walks, back a curb. We're still doing street corners, schools bins. So in terms of has the trial identified a lack of street cleaning? There's certainly a large amount of detritus in that curb that needs to be removed, which will mean once it's gone, we can speed up the actual operation and get round quicker.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Haug.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe on this point. So if my detective work was successful, then I think the information about the 30 minutes per 100 meters with the mechanical cleaning was in the report in March 2025, but not in the report we got after the trial in March 2023. And also in March 25, there was the list of the sequence of the wards that were, how they were going to be done in which sequence, but not the timing. So it wasn't clear, for example, that Trumpington would be in February 26. And I just want to highlight, that this kind of information is really essential if we want to manage expectations and if we don't want to look silly when we talk to our residents. So can I please ask that this kind of information that is really essential for this kind of communication and engagement, mentioning expectation purposes, is really available to councillors, and then we can do our best to communicate that. Thank you.
Yeah, noted, yeah.
Anything else? Okay, then I'm going to comment. I wasn't part of the Environment Committee, so I wasn't aware that anything had been published at all. So I'm, coming to this and reading the report was just a revelation. I really had not understood the extent of the changes necessary, and so I think the communication on this has been really poor. I think, as Councillor Haug says, I wholly endorse his comments. We are able to defend the council and explain what's going on only if we have that information, and that's just not been available. And the other thing that really amazed me is that we're having one pass through all wards in this year. So I wanted to ask first, what did we do before? How many passes through the wards did we have last time? Just to compare what we have now with what we had before. So did we just do one spray, and that in the beginning of spring, and that was it for the year, or did we have several passes through the city?
So in terms of herbicide applications, it was up to 4 times a year. Usually first was in May, second in July, September, and if it was required to finish in October to touch over. So it was quite a laborious task, because every street and every corner had to be covered, and it was done 4 times a year. And it was usually done early mornings, late evenings, and on overtime, so it was quite costly.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. And so what are we? I think you said in response to another question that it's going to be 3 times a year. Is that right? Now?
It's certainly indicating that could potentially be achieved. Bearing in mind we're doing a lot more of it. There's a lot more involved with this activity. So there's a lot of mechanical sweeping, a lot of collection of debris. There's a lot of expectation in terms of moving cars. Just going back to Councillor Hawke's point, there are a lot of variables in terms of how quickly you can do something. So, for instance, Barton Road, we could probably do that in an hour, the whole stretch, because there's no cars parked on there. Whereas somewhere in the city centre could take us an hour to do a very short space of time. So there's a whole range of variables in terms of how quickly we can cover ground. But from the feedback we've got and the work we've already completed, we anticipate between 3 to 4 times a year we'll be working in wards, clearing weeds from streets.
Okay, that's helpful. The other question I had was, why did we stop spraying before we had the mechanical means? Because it seems to me that we've created a real big problem for ourselves for this first year, because we've allowed the weeds to grow so much before we were sort of on an even keel and ready to roll, to keep them under wraps. So why didn't we continue with the chemical spraying until we were ready for the new system?
So if I recall the sequence of, I think if I can recall the sequencing, we've made the decision in March. The budget was approved prior to that in February for the new equipment. There was a significant lead in time of buying that equipment. There is a little bit of learning in terms of the timescales. However, we have now got the equipment. We're mobilising the equipment. We also then had to recruit to the team. We also had to train the team. There's quite a lot of risk assessments and method statements to make sure people are fully aware how to work. We also had to train people in terms of how to work in the highway. So there's a lot of siding and guarding work involved with this. So it has been a lot of hard work in a short period of time, which did slow up the mobilisation. But now we've completed all that work, we should be able to move on quite quickly.
Okay, well, that's very good to hear. And then my last question is, what about the areas of the city that are owned by the county council? Is the city council supposed to be weeding those areas as well?
Correct, yes, we are.
Okay. Okay, that's helpful. All right, does anyone have anything else? Okay, so then I think we are recommending that we have a very active communications plan. Oh, hang on.
If you want me to, Chair, I don't want to keep you unnecessarily.
Yep, go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, I just, well, thank you for all the comments. Really useful to hear those. And thank you also to Alistair for staying up with us and answering all those questions. Appreciate that. I feel as if I should be on the spot answering them, not you really, but anyway. So I just want to pick up on one or two things there. I think your question, Chair, about the timing is spot on. I think Alistair did his best to give an answer there, but I think we made a mistake there looking back. We probably should have, well, I think the thing, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Do we carry on spraying? That seems like a bad thing. We've decided that spraying's bad, but then we carry on doing it, so we stop. But then it takes a while to get into the next system. So it's a quandary, I think, and I suppose as a council we chose, or as a service, we chose to stop the spraying and not spray, but that gave us more of a problem later on to get on top of it all, which is basically what's happening now. So that's my answer to that question, which is slightly different to Alistair's, I think. In terms of the 3 times a year thing, I mean, that's Alistair's forecast. That's not written in a paper or anything yet. So let's hope we can get to 3 times a year. I think it's not so much the number of times a year, but it's about the question that at least one of you asked about, its reference to the seasons is very pertinent. Weeds grow at the same time all around the city, but we've got a system that collects weeds as we move around the city. So that doesn't quite concur. But the only way I could think, and I realised that before, but the only way I can think of is we have some sort of huge team that does the whole city in one go over a short period of time, or we maybe contract it out to external providers, not necessarily what we want to do, in one go. I think the sort of compromise there will be that we get better at doing it, the weeds are less good at surviving because we've been cutting the back for a bit, and we get to be able to go more than once around the city so that we can get the worst of it done in the time when it's growing the best, in the spring and summer. So I think we will come to a situation where we're on top of it better and coping better with the growth. And I think, just reference there, we've been collecting the bins in the city for years, and we've reorganised bin collections and so on to efficiently do that job. Waste bins, this is a new thing. We've only just started doing it, and clearly we're not doing it quite well enough yet, are we? So there's still weed growth. So we need to get better at it, and we will, and I'm determined that will happen. That's part of my determination to make this herbicide-free system continue. So I want to do that. I think the other 3 things briefly, Chair, I'd say, well, I mentioned seasons. So cars are another thing. That's a very important factor. I've done some weeding round cars myself with the team, and it's quite difficult because you don't want to be knocking the cars, because then they'll get insurance claims against the council for damage, and we might get that anyway whether or not there's damage, but that's another story. But it is a difficult one, so we do need to try to manage that as best we can by clearing the cars away or just doing the job carefully around them. And on authorities and other things, so like colleges and schools and that, yes, it's a problem. We're wanting to do things in one way, which costs us and our residents more money, or the council more money, if you like. But other places like schools and even colleges seem to want, well, understandably with schools, they want to do things the cheapest possible way, which means, I suppose, using herbicide, unless you assume that it's okay to have weeds growing everywhere, which seems to be a problem for some people, more so or less so. And also we're surrounded by South Cams that have not got a herbicide-free policy, you know, literally surrounded. They're all spraying. We're surrounded also by the county council, which is also happy to spray anything that moves. So, you know, we have to do our very best. And we also, just to be clear, remove weeds manually for the county council on highways. And that's a job we do for them. They should be doing it. It's their, you know, their highways, not us. But we're doing it, and they give us the money, but they could give us more money. We don't get full cost recovery on that. And that's an ongoing conversation, quite a high-level argument that's going on between those two authorities to get that done. But we're determined, I'm determined, to keep this herbicide-free policy going, regardless of all those challenges, because I think that's what we as a council want. That's what our residents want. And when the nation is surveyed on this, they do mostly want to stop using herbicides and are happy to see some weeds as a result of that. So although there will be instances where things grow too high, and we will react to that, by the way, there is a reactive policy, I do believe that we are doing the right thing, and it's just a matter of the detail of its implementation, which you've all raised tonight, which is very, very real and not to be sidelined, that we need to get better at, and we will work to try to do that, Chair.
Great. Okay, thank you for that. So just to, unless has anyone got anything else? No? Yep. So I will just summarise our comments, and again, please chip in if I've not said everything. I think we're very concerned that we match this to the growth season, and also that the communication improves. So there is a programme out there, it's publicised so that people know that the weeding is going to happen in 3 months' time, roughly. And then also, closer to the time, I think it sounds like you've got the communication for the actual streets and to people to move cars and stuff. That seems to be working quite well. But I think an overview and a sort of a plan of action, and then also an estimation of how you see this going forward, because you know for the people who really get upset about weeds, you know, I think we need to reassure them that that there is a plan, and you know, this is like a one-off year, a bad year, but in the future we think it's going to be much better, and there's going to be more. So I really think there's a bit of work to do, and you've heard it here, that we need to do some bit more communication about what the plan is. And I think the last thing is that we really encourage the council to help other parties not spray stuff. Is there anything else that I should say? Yeah. Okay. So I think we are done on that one. And then the final thing is the work programme. And I would like to ask comments then for any things that you see on there or you think should be added. I'm sorry, I'm struggling to find the page. 61. 61. Okay, thank you. Any comments, anyone?
Sorry, which page are we looking at?
Page 61 of the first supplement document. We have a suggestion, while you're all looking at it, that we have the performance of the regen recycling contract come to this committee. I know that a couple of people have raised the things on the waste contract, and maybe that could come to the committee. So I have raised it with officers. My slight concern with that is that it was thoroughly scrutinised under the old system, and not by this particular committee, but it was scrutinised already. It's now a 5-year contract that's in place, and we are, there's not very much that anyone can do at the moment because that contract is in place and it's not us doing it, it's an external party. But potentially the one thing that we could have here is a sort of a performance report on how that contract is working out and what's happening. But I'm open to suggestions if you think there's something else that we could be doing that might affect, we don't, this committee is not just for the sake of it, to have a discussion about things. It has to be for a purpose for officers then to go away and do something. So my problem with the waste contract right now is that there's nothing much we can do for the next 5 years. So, but we could have a look at how that contract is performing. So I think that's where we're heading on that. But if you've got any comments, Councillor Glasgow.
I think that would be good to get some clarification as well about the actual contract, because a freedom of information was submitted, which has got the response that the contract hasn't actually been signed. So I think it would be quite good if we could find out the actual facts about it.
That's a very fair comment, but I don't think that's something that would be subject to discussion, but I'm very happy to raise that with officers and circulate to the group afterwards what the status is.
Yeah. And otherwise, yes, an update on how it's working. But I was quite concerned to hear that, as I'm sure you must be. It doesn't sound quite right.
Okay, Councillor Gardner-Smith.
The only other thing that I notice isn't on here but had been discussed is bins and a potential of a sort of reorganising of certain bin collection routes that might come early next year.
Yep, thank you. I remember that too, yep. All right, in which case, if there are no further comments, I think that concludes this meeting. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Much appreciated.